So remember when we first started and we had a low resolution object and we wanted to subdivide it. And with the smooth modifier turned on, if we hit divide, what that's going to do is give everything, if we touch polyframe off and then turn it back on again, it's going to update with a higher res polyframe. That's just FYI. If I go back to subdivision level 1, turn that off and turn that on, go up to subdivision level 2, see how it doesn't have the lines, turn it off, turn it on. Now you've got the kind of the ghosted lines for subdivision level 2. You're going to see it upped our resolution. It gave us more resolution. It subdivided the mesh, and it also averaged the vertices, so everything kind of melted, right? If we undo that, undo until we have no subdivision left, we turn smooth off, and we hit divide, you're going to see it updated. It gave us the resolution, only it didn't average any vertices. It didn't melt our object. Just something to keep in mind while we talk about dynamic subdivisions. Now this is awesome. So what is dynamic subdivisions? So when we hit turn this on, what it's going to do is give us a preview, and we have the smooth subdivision. So remember the SMT modifier that was turned on when we hit subdivide here, SMT. Let's go ahead and leave that on. That is being mimicked down here, but it's not real yet. So if we have SMT of 1, that's nothing, or 0. 1 is if you hit Control D once and give it a subdivision. 2 is if you hit it twice. 3 is if you hit it 3 times. It's just giving you a dynamic preview. And if we turn that off, it goes immediately back. So in Maya, and the other 3D programs have the exact same thing. In Maya, I think it's if you hit 1, 2, or 3, or 3, and your keyboard by default, it'll kind of give you a sub-D preview. And if you hit 2, it'll give you a sub-D preview on the inside with your low-res mesh as a envelope that you can kind of still modify around it. Same thing in here. If you go ahead and hit D, it'll give you a dynamic. It'll turn on dynamic as long as you don't have a subdivision. It'll turn on dynamic. And if you hit Shift D, it'll turn it off. So if we hit D and we go in here and let's say we want to go ahead and Q-mesh this face, I'm going to go ahead and go into my ZModeler, which I don't even know if I mentioned this. BZM is the ZModeler brush. Sorry about that. I just used my hotkey. That's your ZModeler. So if we go in here and we want to Q-mesh this poly, we have another Q-mesh a single poly. I'm going to pull this up. And you can actually Q-mesh the single poly up, or, oops, let's hit D. We can Q-mesh this poly out. So without even going out of dynamic, we can go ahead and just Q-mesh this out. Now you're going to see when I just barely Q-mesh this, how it kind of gives me a flat, more of a flat shape, but the more I pull this out, the rounder it gets. That's kind of the basics of box modeling. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that a little bit more. The easiest way to demonstrate this, if I hit D, and let's go ahead and up this a little bit. So I'm going to take the smooth sub-Ds and turn this up to 3. So if I have this object and I hit Shift D, you're going to see when I subdivide this vertice and this vertice here, so all of these verts here are going to subdivide, and there's going to put a line down the middle, and they're just going to kind of melt and average. So actually, let's bring this back down to 1. So hey, see how I subdivide and it kind of melts and averages? Let's go ahead and hit Shift D. Now if I insert a edge loop, a single one here, right down the middle, and then I hit D, it's going to kind of maintain that form a little bit better. In fact, if I undo that, and I go here along the edge, and see how you can kind of see as I roll over the outline? That's the same thing as kind of like seeing the low-res cage around your preview subdivision mesh. So if I hover over this edge and insert a single edge loop, you're going to see, oh, it actually helps maintain that shape a little bit better. If I put another one in there, it's going to it's going to make it flatter and maintain that shape a little bit better along this edge. Same thing if I go along this edge. If I hit Shift D and just insert an edge along this edge and make it really close to this one and hit D, it's going to maintain that cylinder shape a little bit better. If I hit Control Z and then I insert one, you can kind of see it update on the fly. The closer I pull it, the tighter that edge loop gets and the tighter that cylinder is. If I drag another one, it's going to get super tight along that cylinder. And let's go ahead and bump up our subdivisions here dynamically. So here we go. Just pull it in and watch it get tighter. Same thing along the sides here. If I put in an edge loop and I pull it towards the top, it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter until it's really tight when you just insert an edge loop really close to the top one. I can do the same thing to a bottom one here. Hover over the edge and just pull down. It's going to kind of tighten those up. Now, that's one way to do that. And you might notice up here, you're like, well, why is this one really tight? I didn't add any edge loops in here. That's because by default, when I did that split point operation, see, it goes ahead and makes that crease. And we talked about creasing before. It adds that little dotted line around there. That's a crease. So you can actually go in here and crease things instead of adding subdivision level. So if I hit Shift D, we're back in box modeling mode, and you can kind of see it's a darker line in here. That's because we pushed those edges so close together, they just make almost a single dark line. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Undo. Okay, so I think we're back where we started. So instead of adding geometry to kind of tighten up our shapes, I can actually just crease an area. So if we go hit D, see how this is nice and smooth in here? If I crease these edges out here, I'm going to hover over an edge and choose Crease, Edge, and then I just tap on these edges here, and then hit D. It's going to keep these edges really super crispy. Now, there's a couple things we can do with creasing and edges in a bit, but I'm not quite there yet. We can do the same thing with this over here, and if we kind of hover over and see the low-res cage surrounding our object, we can kind of just go in here and tap this edge. Oops, careful on this one. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to go in here and select. See how it's kind of the edge is disappearing, so you got to go down here and select the edge. If it's getting difficult to kind of select something, hit Shift D, and then you've got the edges right there. It won't fight you. Then hit D again, and we crease those edges, and now everything's really super tight. So it doesn't matter if we're subdivision smoothness of 1 or 4. It's going to maintain a super sharp edge around there because it's a creased edge. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to tell it, I want to crease it by this much over this many subdivision levels. However, what you can do is go to your crease menu here, and there's a bevel option in here. So you have the option to go ahead and say, hey, all my creased areas on my object, go ahead and bevel them. And if we take this bevel width and we shrink it down, you can control how tight that bevel is on those creases. You can do proportionate bevel width, add some resolution to that bevel, so that'll actually add more inserted edge loops along your bevel, so you can have a lot of control over that. If we hit Shift D, you can kind of see what that's doing. That's basically just beveling those creases, so I'm going to undo that. So we've got our creases here. Now, without hitting D, I'm going to hit bevel, and you're going to do the bevel width here, and you're going to see it hopefully update. Let's go ahead and undo out of that. Let's go ahead and crease these. So Shift D, crease, crease, hit bevel, and now when we do the bevel width, you're going to see big bevel width, small bevel width. So you can kind of control that along your creasing.